Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, we're going to be jumping into the Shōgun series. It just had its finale a few days ago. I got to check it out. I've been watching all along every single week. I've absolutely loved this series and wanted to share my thoughts and a bit of a review on it. So let's get ready to jump in because there's a lot to talk about.
己の務めを果たす覚悟はできておるか。
覚悟はできておりまする。
Welcome once again, my name is Austin, and Shōgun has been one of my favorite series I've seen in years and probably is one of the best series I've ever seen. I have thoroughly enjoyed it from beginning to end. The show has incredible character work, powerful storytelling, beautiful filmmaking, and production design, and is just absolutely epic in scope. The story kicks off where we find this mysterious European vessel marooned in a Japanese small fishing village, and Lord Yoshi Toranaga, played by the fantastic Hiroyuki Sanada, is this leader of this area in this region, and he discovers some secrets through this vessel and those on it to help tip those scales of power and devastate his enemies. The story is very much like a game of chess playing out. There are moves that are being thought of many turns in advance. There's so much strategy being played out by the different leader characters of this series. And alongside with that, we get a huge and fantastic cast of characters as well. Each one is on their own journey, has their own desires and their own things that they're looking to get and achieve through this story. And it just, the way that things are done both individually and things crossing over with one another is so well executed and so well written.
This is not where we die. We should be corpses by now, but here we are.
Jumping into the performances, Cosmo Jarvis is our lead here. We are following along with his character of John Blackthorne. I don't believe I have seen him in anything before, so this was my first time getting to see him in a role of any kind, let alone a lead role, and I thought he was absolutely incredible. I definitely need to look up some of his other previous work because I want to know more about him and the projects that he's been a part of, because I thought his character, his performance, the way he had such a strong handle on his character was absolutely incredible. Both with and a little bit opposite of him, we have Anna Sawai as Lady Mariko, and this is kind of the translator because she speaks Japanese as her native language and Portuguese, which we hear as English in the series. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So she speaks his language and is able to translate for him for Yoshi Toranaga as well as the others in this story. And Anna Sawai is another standout. I go back and forth between John Blackthorne and Mariko's characters as my favorite in the series. When the two of them are on screen together, the chemistry is fantastic. I could watch the two of them on screen for each episode running an hour long, and you do, for the most part. You get to see a lot of them because they're pretty prominent characters, but besides them, there's a lot of other great roles too. Some other standouts for me was Hiroyuki Sanada as Yoshi Toranaga, another kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say lead. He's definitely a main character, but not one of the leading roles, as it's more about John Blackthorne and Mariko. But there's just so many pieces at play in this one. It's kind of hard to categorize people as main characters and secondary characters. So he's another fantastic role. Definitely one of the best performances of Hiroyuki Sanada's career. I think he's incredible in pretty much everything he does, and this might be some of his best work. Also, we have Tadanobu Asano as Kashige Yabashige, and he is such an interesting character. He kind of is set up as this guy who's more in it for himself. He will play both sides of, you know, both teams, and whatever is working for his self-interest, that's where he's going to go. And so he's kind of set up that way, which could follow, you know, some common tropes and directions they do with that character. But he's so complex and interesting in the way that he does all of those things. It adds another level to that character that I feel like we haven't really seen in that type of role before. Then we have Moeka Hoshi as Asami Fuji, and she is a fairly smaller character. She's only in a few episodes here and there. She is more of a prominent character in a couple of episodes, but I think she was incredible. I definitely want to look up more of her work as well because I thought she was really great. She deals with some of the most difficult and dire circumstances of any character in this series, and she just hits it out of the park with her performance. There's so much depth, so much emotion to her character. She's a very soft-spoken, quiet character, and so much is communicated through her eyes and her small little micro mannerisms. And not only with her, but with the rest of the cast, so much of what makes these performances great is not what they are saying and what they are doing, but what they are not saying and what they are not doing. And that is such a talent to be able to convey through an acting performance, and all of them do so well in that. There's a level of communication throughout this series that is inaudible and not done through any action, and is just, you just see someone in a setting or a location just sitting in silence, looking, pondering, thinking, and it's so compelling.
We live and we die. We control nothing beyond that.
Jumping into the filmmaking now, the production of this series is absolutely incredible. The costumes, the language and dialogue and writing of this series, the sets and locations, the cinematography, the special effects and the CGI are fantastic. It all is so well done. There's a level of historical accuracy to this series that I have never seen in any other American production. This is an American production of this series, but they wanted to make it authentic in putting it in Japanese. They filmed it not in Japan. I believe they filmed it in somewhere in Canada. I forget exactly where, but Vancouver, I believe, is where they shot a lot of this series. And they really went out of their way with the sets and locations to build around stuff that was already there to make it so convincing and just work so well for the culture that is such a heavy piece of this series. And then I mentioned the writing and the dialogue earlier with the way the languages are spoken throughout the series. I would say 80 to 85% of this series is spoken in Japanese. There are a couple of characters who don't speak Japanese and speak what we hear as English, but is actually Portuguese. John Blackthorne is the one that I would most say fits into that category. But as the series goes on and he learns some Japanese, he starts speaking it. But what's so interesting about the language is I know nothing of Japanese language, but I listened in some interview or behind the scenes fact that they wrote this series in English. It is, like I said, an American production, and had it translated into Japanese and then sent that Japanese translation to a Japanese playwright who specializes in the Japanese spoken in the 1600s time period that this series takes place. And he tweaked it here and there to make it as authentic and accurate as possible. And if you go out of your way for something like that, when the majority of your audience is going to be English-speaking Americans who won't even know the difference, that's incredible. So kudos to the studio for going out of their way to add not only a level of authenticity to the costumes, the sets, and the locations that they film on, but actually going out of their way to make sure the language is as accurate as possible as well. That's fantastic. The costume design better win an Emmy for this one because it's absolutely incredible. There's a lot of behind the scenes interviews that I've listened to and watched where they talk about how careful they were with the attention to detail to get these costumes not only comfortable, but as accurate as possible for the time period, the different social statuses that these characters had all along the way. Absolutely great work done by the costume department as well. Like I said, this is just masterful filmmaking on a large epic scale within this series.
Do not be fooled by our politeness. Our bows are made of rituals.
Jumping into some themes now, one of the most prominent ones through the series is that of power. And there's a heavy dynamic of power, and each of the characters in this movie are seeking power for their own reasons, their own motivations, and some of them will do malevolent things to get it. Others are seeking to do it in a way of peace. And so all of that is so well explored and just presented through those characters in really, really interesting, compelling ways. Besides that, we also get these heavy themes of honor and loyalty, and that of what it means for the social hierarchy of a time period that I know very little about. I love and appreciate a ton of Asian, specifically Japanese culture and history. I think it's really fascinating, but I understand very little of it. And I feel like this series was a perfect balance of not only a incredibly entertaining series, but one that was very informative as well. I learned so much about Japanese culture from the 1600s that I did not know before. And I found that incredibly passionate of the filmmakers to make sure they made things as intricately detailed and accurate as they possibly could. Something as, in our minds, simple as a tea ceremony between a husband and a wife, the craft and the detail put into it to bring in consultants to make sure that that was done authentically to the way even tea ceremonies are still done to this day, something that's been a hundreds of years, thousands of years tradition. And it's so well constructed throughout all of this series. And a lot of those things are stuck in there, and they absolutely work within the story as well. It adds to the world building and the lore that follows for this historical fiction story. Another very prominent theme that I thought was that of religion and Christianity. A number of the characters in this series are either, very much in the religion that many Japanese people would follow. Again, I don't understand enough about Japanese historical and culture to know that myself, but there's a lot to do with that, with the, like I've spoken of, the honor and the loyalty to your leader of your region and your territories. But then we also get a lot of different versions of Christianity throughout this series. One of the prominent ones being Catholic Christian, there's Protestant Christian, and then there's even this culmination of a couple of characters who are very much Japanese, that is their heritage, but they've also converted to this Catholic Christian, and they kind of hybrid it in a way of some using it for their own selfish gains while still claiming to be Christians, and others really trying to walk that line and be able to live in both of those worldviews and those lifestyles. And I found that very, very interesting. I love the way that the religion was explored here. It never felt like it was pushing any kind of agenda or message. It just felt very authentic to, this is what Christianity is, and this is how some humans choose to live out that lifestyle, whether it be for good or for bad, and the way that that kind of affects that life. So I found that very interesting as well, being a Christian myself, the way that the religion was explored throughout this series. As far as any criticisms go for this series, I really have nothing. I would have to nitpick to pick a couple of things. Some that might bother some people here and there would be the pacing of the series. It is very much a slow burn. It is a lot of conversations and ceremonies and different things like that that are, like I've said, very interesting, incredibly well written, very well constructed, but the pacing is overall fairly slow for the series. But it just means that when they are building up to something and there is that climax of some kind of action sequence or fight or battle, it hits that much harder because you are fully in on those character motivations and the reasons for their being a part of those situations. Aside from that, without spoiling anything for the series finale, it isn't what you would expect as far as building up towards this big epic battle that we're going to fight and then reach some kind of conclusion and all that kind of stuff. It is something that is much more of like we had all of this conflict leading up to the end, and then when we got near the end, we had some conflict and resolution a bit, and the last episode plays out as a bit of an epilogue. But I really liked and appreciated that, because as much as it is epilogic in some kind of ways, it is very much the culmination of everything that we've gone through so far, all the way back to the beginning of this series, and the way that it pays off all of these characters, the decisions they've been making, all of their motivations all along this way is really beautiful, the way that everything is wrapped up. It kind of leaves a few open-ended threads, but gives you just enough to feel like you had a satisfying conclusion with the way that things wrapped up. So I absolutely loved this series overall. It's easily my favorite show so far this year. We're fixing to have another really strong year for television series so far. I'm going to miss the fact that I can no longer watch this every week. The past 10 weeks, this has been something I look forward to every single week. I very well might just keep rewatching this show as the year goes on to watch it at least one more time before things wrap up. Before I wrap up this video, though, I do want to mention one more thing, that if you have loved this show and you haven't checked it out yet, is there is a companion podcast. There's the Shōgun official podcast companion or something like that. that has been going episode by episode, releasing behind the scenes interviews with some of the producers, the creators, the directors, a lot of the consultants that they brought on for this series, and it's led by one of the writers of the show, so very much in it with the nitty-gritty of everything that they did throughout this series. And I thought the way that all of those interviews were conducted was so good. I learned so much additional stuff and subtext along the way to a lot of the things that were happening in this series. So definitely check out that official companion podcast if you've not already, and you're missing the fact that you won't be able to check out more Shōgun anymore. It's a really cool way to take an extra step and dive deeper into the series. So that wraps up my thoughts on the series. Definitely, like I said, a 10 out of 10, my favorite show so far this year. I would highly recommend this to anyone to check out. Give it a chance. I think you'll really enjoy it. So thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I will see you in the next one.